Hi everyone, this is Sarfraz from Aristotle Prep, and we are looking at passage 15 from the OG 13 RC chapter. This has questions 69 to 74. We will first read the passage, understand it properly, think of a purpose, and then approach the questions. Since the entire passage is only of one paragraph, it's all the more important to focus on transition words as we will when we read. So the first sentence is always very important. It says, two works published in 1984 demonstrate contrasting approaches to writing the history of United States women. So that first sentence tells me that the passage will be about the history of women in the US and most likely about or a comparison about those two works mentioned. Buell and Buell's biography of Mary Fish makes little effort to place her story in the context of recent historiography on women. Lepsock, meanwhile, attempts not only to write the history of women in one southern community, but also to redirect through decades of historiographical debate as to whether women gained or lost status in the 19th century as compared with the 18th century. So now I know what are the two works. One is by Buell and Buell, the other is by Lepsock. And there's a difference between the two. Buell and Buell is avoiding all recent historiography or any mention of that, whereas Lepsock is taking into account that historiography or the historiographical debate, whatever that means, I have no idea. So I'll read on. Although both books offer the reader the opportunity to assess this controversy regarding women's status. What is the controversy? In case you are not aware, you've forgotten. The controversy is whether women gained or lost status in the 19th century compared to the 18th century. So, although both books offer the reader the opportunity to assess this controversy regarding women's status, only Lepsock deals with it directly. Okay, she examines several different aspects of women's status, helping to refine and resolve the issues. She concludes that while women gained autonomy in some areas, especially in the private sphere, they lost it in many aspects of the economic sphere. So this is comparing 18th and 19th century. So she's saying in the private sphere they gained autonomy, but in the economic sphere they lost autonomy. More importantly, she shows that the debate itself depends on frame of reference. In many respects, women lost power in relation to men. For example, as certain jobs were taken over by men. Okay, yet women also gained power in comparison with their previous status, owning a higher proportion of real estate, for example. So it's also saying that the frame of reference has to be right, because when you compare with men, it might look like women have lost power, but when you compare women's current status with their previous status, then the status may have actually improved or increased. Okay. In contrast, Buell and Buell's biography provides ample raw material for questioning the myth fostered by some historians of a colonial golden age in the 18th century, but does not give the reader much guidance in analyzing the controversy over women's status. So now you see, Buell and Buell is basically calling something a myth, and the myth is that there was a colonial golden age in the 18th century for women, but it's calling it a myth, so that was not actually the case. So if I summarize the entire passage, it's basically talking about two works of women's history, one by Buell and Buell, one by Lepsock. Buell and Buell doesn't take into account the historiography, Lepsock does. Lepsock's work is typically broader or more direct, and it addresses the question of whether women gained or lost status in the 19th century. And Lepsock says in some areas they gained, in some areas they lost. Whereas Buell and Buell basically tells you that there was a myth that women had a great time in the 18th century. It's a myth. Keep that in mind. The author who wrote the passage, I think, is mostly neutral, though he favors, Lepsock a little more than he does Buell and Buell. But overall, I think he's mostly neutral in the passage. So having understood the passage like that, we will now look at the questions, starting with the first one, which is question 69. It's a global question asking you for the primary purpose of the passage. As I said, it's mostly neutral, so I will look at the first word and try to eliminate. A says examine, which is okay. B says call into question, which is wrong. C says examine, which is okay. Discuss is also okay. Explain could also be okay. So only B I could eliminate by looking at the first word. I will read the other four options completely now. So A says examine two sides of a historiographical debate. I don't think he's examining two sides of a debate. There are two different works, but they're not giving you two sides of a debate. So don't let that two sides and two works confuse you. B says, call into question B was anyway out. C says, examine one author's approach to a historiographical debate. It's actually examining two authors' approaches, so I don't think C should be correct. D says, discuss two authors' works in relationship to a historiographical debate. That is perfect. That is the answer. E says, explain the prevalent perspective on a historiographical debate. That doesn't happen. So D definitely is the answer to your question there.